Hello, welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Our guest tonight is Chris Todd from District 73, which covers part of Madison County, and he is currently running for re-election. But first, if you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you'd like to broadcast on this show, please send the information to tninformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. If you want our state to stand up to federal overreach, the best way to do that is support the Nullification process bill sponsored by Senator Bolin and Representative Holsey that they intend to bring back next session. Visit tncss.weebly.com/call to action, sign a petition, and follow the instructions on the link. Our state senators and reps need to know we want this legislation passed when they return in January. Now is also the time to get candidates for state office on record as well. D.C. will never fix D.C. Only the states can fix D.C., and we have to demand that our states stand up to and uphold their oath to the U.S. and Tennessee Constitution. Now to our guest, Representative Chris Todd. Thank you for coming on. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great, Dave. Good to hear from you. Good to see you.
Well, you too. I appreciate what you do. And speaking here from your hometown, or your former hometown in Paris, Tennessee. You've been away from here for a few years.
Yeah, a long time.
Now, so this is your third or fourth term you're running for?
I'm in my third term right now.
Okay. And you do have an opponent this time around in the primary.
Yes, sir. Well, as a matter of fact, one of my supporters. He's been a supporter before, but not this year.
Oh, wow. Well, one of the issues in our state and across the country is the perversion being pushed in our schools and communities. You sponsored some legislation that was passed pushing back against the adult cabaret performances in public. Tell us about that.
Well, we had an interesting situation come up here in Madison County where a local pride group, then they've had this pride event every year for a few years, and they decided that they would run a family-friendly drag show and started advertising it. And as you can see, the advertisement that's up on the screen now, and some of the characters on there that they were advertising, folks started digging into their past and into some of the insinuated things that are on their costumes and whatnot, and found a good portion of that linked to pedophilia. And so they got really up in arms and came to me and said, is there anything we can do? So we researched our current law of obscenities and dealing with adult cabarets and other things, and looked into that and decided that we needed to make some changes, that it wasn't extremely clear that grown men couldn't do obscene things in front of children, especially in these settings. And so the citizens riled up. They asked me what to do. I said, well, we're going to have to hire an attorney because the city's not backing down. We approached the city, and Mayor Scott Conger did everything he could to support this group and to prevent the citizens from thwarting their efforts to have this, quote, family-friendly drag show. So the citizens got together. They started raising money, just literally a grassroots, call your friends, and they raised, I don't remember, somewhere around $8,000, I think, and told me to get an attorney. So I filed a suit. I got Senator Jackson to join me in that, and then we had about a dozen or more citizens actually sign on to that lawsuit. It was heard in Chancery Court in Jackson, or at least that's where it was filed, and there was some negotiation going on. As a matter of fact, the ACLU actually took the side of the city in this one and defended the city of Jackson. They did most of the negotiating. And at the end of the day, we had a settlement where they agreed to take this out of a public park setting and put it inside the Civic Center, and it would be an 18 and up event. Well, then fast forward several months, and those same citizens wanted me to do something to make sure that this couldn't happen again, if at all possible. And so I filed a bill and ended up getting it passed into law fairly early on in session in 2023 that would clarify that this type of performance where you had some kind of obscenity, where you had nudity of any kind, or you had some kind of a sexual demonstration even, or acting out some simulated sex acts, would be classified as against the law. And so that got passed. It's been challenged in Shelby County not long after we passed that law. And a judge ruled that for Shelby County, there would be an injunction while this case was heard. So it cannot be enforced in Shelby County, but it is enforced in 94 other counties across the state. And that has currently been appealed to the Sixth Circuit. And we don't have any kind of ruling. It was last we heard anything was in February, and it's still on their docket. And I'm not sure when our Attorney General will be able to present anything in front of that court. But I think it'll ultimately be held up because we didn't do anything that was unconstitutional. As a matter of fact, the ACLU refused to file suit on this. There were groups that asked them to after we passed that law, and they said, no, there's nothing unconstitutional about it. So we're confident we're going to win in this one.
Okay, but now the ACLU was taking the city side initially, right?
They did take the city side to some degree and sort of stepped in to help represent this pride group and the city of Jackson. The lawsuit was against the city because they were allowing it in a public park. And they had at least 4 ordinances that the mayor had at his disposal that wouldn't have affected their their First Amendment rights at all whatsoever. And he absolutely refused to enforce those ordinances on the books and wanted to allow it in that public park.
I hope he's up for re-election soon, and I hope you guys get another mayor.
Well, he was last year, and he won, unfortunately.
Good Lord.
Non-partisan race, and so you know how some of those go when folks don't really have everything in front of them with what their true colors are and what their history is.
Right. Well, just the whole notion, a family-friendly drag event. That's just a total oxymoron. There's no such thing as a family-friendly drag event. That's just
no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, and one interesting fact about this, we had some folks contact us with an organization called Gays Against Groomers. And I was not familiar with this group, but they reached out and said, we've seen your bill and we want to help. And so a gay guy with his husband drove over 9 hours from Kansas City, Missouri, I believe it was. And I don't remember which side of the line they were on, but they were Kansas City anyway. And they got to testify, or he got to testify for 3 minutes in committee, but he drove all that way and back to testify because he said, this is so important because there's no purpose in having a drag show in front of children unless it's to recruit and groom them. And we are tired of it. We don't believe that's right. If an adult wants to go to that kind of thing, that's perfectly fine, but no kids. And so they fought against it with us and joined us in that effort and helped get it passed.
Wow. Well, they're definitely coming after our kids, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a lot of the issues in our schools as well. It just seems like we cannot, we pass laws, and it seems like at every turn there's some sort of legal pushback, and it's ridiculous in my opinion that we can't keep this garbage out of our schools, especially.
Totally agree. We're going to continue trying to fight that, and as you know, we've passed a lot of good laws in the last few years to fight against a variety of things like that, including keeping boys out of girls' bathrooms and girls' locker rooms. And we're going to stand by that, and we're going to continue fighting that fight because that's just absolutely wrong. Everybody knows it's just common sense.
Yeah. So do you know if the people pushing this agenda, are they supporting your opponent?
Well, there have been folks telling me that the Pride group is supporting my opponent. They're hearing comments on the radio and seeing things on social media posts. I don't know for sure, but that's what I'm being told.
Okay. This is not something I thought we would have happen. I understand, metro areas anymore, they're all blue, but it's to think about this kind of thing happening in Tennessee and in West Tennessee especially,
yeah.
It's hard to believe sometimes.
Yeah, in a Republican primary.
Yeah. You've been really strong on the Second Amendment, and you've had some success with legislation. And let's talk about some of the legislation you've passed and what you intend to sponsor in the future.
Okay. One of probably the most important thing I have gotten passed is a bill that I worked with the late Judge Carter on quite a bit. And this was back in 2021, and it in essence sets up a scenario in the law where if someone has a self-defense issue where they have to exercise their their Second Amendment right to defend themselves, and they are charged criminally. And while there's an investigation going on, if there is a civil case filed against them, which happens quite often, then they have the ability under the law now to put that civil case on hold, to stay that case, so they're not fighting on two fronts. Very important, because as you well know, fighting a legal case can drain you financially and physically. And so this that you focus on the criminal first, and then once that's adjudicated, then the civil case can proceed. There's also an off-ramp for that, where you can claim that you have civil immunity, as we define in this law, and you can go before a judge in that civil case and ask for an immunity hearing. So that can get that case thrown out very quickly on the very first few days of the case, and allow you then to focus on the criminal case, which certainly is most of the time more important. So that was a very big deal. I know folks with the TFA have said, I've heard them say quite often how that's probably one of the biggest Second Amendment legislation pieces that's been passed in decades. And at the time, I knew it was big, but I didn't know what kind of ramifications that would have and how big it would be. So very excited that we got that across the finish line. I've continued to try to push to remove infringements from your Second Amendment rights. We have infringements on the books here in Tennessee law, and been trying to get those removed, but continue to get some roadblocks along the way. We get them out of our House committees, and things stall, seem to, a lot of times on that topic in the Senate. And so we're back and forth trying to negotiate and get some movement there, but been unsuccessful on that particular effort. But I had one this year that I did get across the line that the House actually passed unanimously back in 2020 before we adjourned for all the COVID stuff. But then the Senate didn't take it up when they came back. You know, we were kind of in an abbreviated session at that point, and kind of a get in and get out and wrap up the final budget and everything. So this bill didn't get brought back up. So I brought it up this year and got it passed. And it simply requires firearms training, just basic type of training for kids in elementary school and junior and high school from whatever age is determined to be appropriate by the Department of Education, TWRA, and the Department of Safety. They all get together and determine what age is going to be the best appropriate time to start this training. And basic things like, if you see a gun, don't touch it. I mean, just the most basic things. It's not going to be anything with live firearms or real guns at all, but it's going to be just talking kids through, just like a fire drill does. If this happens, then you do this. And very clear, very plain, simple, and it's going to be repetitive. So they hear this year in and year out, and that it will eventually sink in. And I think it'll save lives. I truly believe it will. So we worked really hard to get that done this year. Certainly had opposition from the normal crowd of wanting gun control. So if you have anything teaching anybody about firearms, you know, they're going to come out against it, but we were able to get it across the finish line, and I'm anxious to see that get implemented in the next couple of years in our elementary schools to get that started.
Yeah, and I'm sure the same people that were opposing that were all for teaching anything having to do with sex in the school. I'm sure they're fine with that.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the civil and the criminal. I think just so some of the people out there may not understand that usually the threshold for a civil action is a whole lot lower in terms of proving guilt than what it is in criminal. So you've got the fact that it's easier to get convicted, and of course the amounts. I mean, that could break you well before you even get to your criminal trial, because especially depending on everything involved. I mean, you may have to wait months or maybe longer for your criminal trial, but I guarantee you that civil trial probably hits you pretty quick and be very, very expensive, and like I said, a lower threshold.
Absolutely, and that lower threshold can hurt you then in the criminal case. If your prosecutor or anybody can bring up in that criminal case that, well, they've had a civil case already and been, they've either pled or had an agreement, a settlement, or something that could hurt you in the criminal case when it should.
Yeah, and well, they're going to, especially if you made some sort of plea or if you settled, well, then they'll definitely use that against you in the criminal case.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad to see that legislation get passed. Hey, why is it so hard to get good Second Amendment legislation passed in Tennessee?
Well, I think some of our members have a feeling that things are okay, that Tennessee is a good state from the standpoint of Second Amendment, and they don't really get into the details. And when you talk about the details, for example, 3917, 1307A1, that says it's a crime to go armed with a firearm or a club in the state, period. You're starting out, that's the way our law is written, that it's a crime to carry a firearm in the state. Then you have all these exceptions. It's very complicated to read it. But you start explaining that, and they kind of glaze over, and they don't really, it's not an important issue to them, to at least some people. So I think that's part of it. And then the other part is the strong pressure from the left to leave things as they are or try to make it harder on law-abiding citizens to be able to defend themselves and for whatever their motives are. So I think both of those play into it. And certainly there are probably other personal factors and things like that as well, where someone has a strong supporter or a support group that is pressuring them to oppose those kind of things without really understanding all the ramifications of our law related to the Constitution and how it's already in violation of the Second Amendment of our U.S. Constitution. So, and that's been shown in court cases. So you'd think it'd be even easier, but it's just not.
Well, and I brought this up before, back in 2015, which is before you were in, when the gay marriage opinion was given, our state folded in about 2 hours, if that. It's been almost 2 years. Matter of fact, no, it was 2 years, the 22nd, since the Bruin opinion, which basically said if the restriction didn't exist in 1791, it's not valid now. But they have just resisted that. It's like, we're not going to follow that one. So I mean, it's pretty sad. You would think that that's something they would have been all over. Okay, hey, we got no reason to now, especially when they had a lot of reason to push back on the whole gay marriage thing, because marriage has never been a federal issue.
Sure.
But within 2 hours, within 2 hours they folded. Almost over 2 years, and they're still fighting. I'm concerned too about the opinion that the court gave the other day, the 8-1, having to do with, and I understand the guy was, a convicted felon, but it seems to me like the court is already maybe backtracking from what they said in reference to if the restriction didn't exist in 1791, then it's not valid now. And now we got an 8-1 with Thomas being the only one saying, hey, you still don't have any constitutional justification for this. But I've
not read that case to know exactly how they justified that, but I thought the same thing on the surface. So wait a minute, you're kind of contradicting what you said in Bruin. So I certainly need some explaining.
Right, and unfortunately, there will be people in our legislature that they'll hold on to that, and they'll wait and see, especially if the court pulls back any more from Bruin, and that'll just give them cover, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. There's another bill that you sponsored. It doesn't have anything to do with firearms, but it's House Bill 2879. It was an attempt to restrict certain real property transactions by certain foreign entities. And now the bill failed in the local government committee. Is that something you want to bring back? And who is opposing that? Because a lot of people realize now that we have people from foreign countries, China for one, buying up property here. And a lot of us are legitimately concerned about that. And so I'm hoping that this is a bill that you'll bring back, and maybe we can identify who the opposition is and get this thing through somehow.
Well, the good part is we already have some laws on the book now. We actually have two. One was passed this year, right before mine came through committee. Mine was right behind the bill that actually got passed that does restrict foreign ownership of land in Tennessee by our adversaries. But mine actually went a little further. It more clearly defined that, but it also included critical infrastructure, because we don't want these foreign bad actors that literally are out to get us owning our hospitals, our water system, our wastewater system, any part of that, even our natural gas distribution system, things like that, which they can now. They actually are allowed to. So mine went a little further part of the issue I had in the House was the timing. Jay Reedy had the other bill, and who represents, I think, your district where
Yep,
you live,
yep.
and it was just literally right in front of mine. And so the committee felt like there was some contradiction. And it's really odd if you go back and look at the video where I was presenting this bill in this committee. It was so strange because Jay is on the committee, and I was saying that Jay and I talked. We had both looked into this, and there's no conflict. They actually will marry up very nicely and complement each other. Jay literally said once, if not twice, during that committee, same thing. They will complement each other. They still voted mine down. Some days when you're looking at these committees and you're, just an average person watching it, you're thinking, what are they thinking? He just told them this, and yet they're doing this. Why would they do that? So I don't know. Some things you just can't explain. That does happen sometimes. So I think we certainly will be looking at what tweaks we can make to what's already on the books. So it may not be the exact same bill, but it may be some slight variation of that will still have the same purpose to try to solidify that ability for us to reject any kind of ownership from our foreign adversaries of things in our state that we know they don't need to own.
Right. Now, what committee was that?
I'd have to go back and look. I've had that out of my head several months now, so I don't remember the exact committee.
Yeah. And now, what I'm going to bring up is not exactly the same, but it really kind of irritated me. This happened yesterday. I was at a local state park, matter of fact, Paris Landing State Park. Stopped in there, looked at a few things, and they had a little store, and not even really big enough to call a store. I mean, one of those little food trucks probably have more on it than this store had. But there was one or two things made in the USA, but everything else was made somewhere else. Nicaragua, China.
Yeah.
I'm like, why? I would think at a state park that we would sell stuff made in Tennessee, or at least stuff made in the USA, certainly not made in China.
Yeah.
And that's pretty frustrating. It's irritating.
Yeah.
I would think our state would say, okay, look, this is a state park, state-run facility. We are going to sell stuff from Tennessee. And we're close.
And the administration could do that. They could have a policy to do that. But if we as lawmakers tried to do that, here's what we'd run into. First thing first, we would run into a fiscal note. There would be a cost to that because the department would be able to say, we buy X number of widgets a year. And these widgets are made in China. If we have to require those to be made in the U.S. or in the state, it's going to cost 15% more, 10% more. So it's going to cost us X amount of dollars. And we would have to cover that in the budget. So it would probably die and not get through. It's very difficult to have a cost of a bill incorporated into the budget. So I just pitch that out as a thought there of how the system works and how nobody's intentionally trying to keep you from passing that. It's just physically difficult when you start prioritizing those costs in the budget to get enough people on board to say that's what we want to do. We're wanting to spend our money in this spot.
But you say if the governor proposed it, they would do it.
The administration has the ability within the budget that we pass to make those changes. So that there certainly is an ability that they could require that as a policy.
But I thought the legislature, I thought the House especially controlled the purse strings. And I understand the governor is supposed to help propose a budget. Mm-hmm. But
you're exactly right.
Ultimately, the House is where the power's at as far as the power of the purse.
Absolutely. And so if the governor proposes $100 million a year for TDEC parks and the things they purchase in, let's say in their concession stands or their marinas or wherever that might be, then within that budget, they could say, we're choosing as a policy to do this. But if we say we're going to force you to do it, then they're going to come back and say, okay, out of that 100 million, X number of things are going to be purchased that normally would be purchased from China or Sri Lanka or wherever. And if we have to purchase those in the U.S., then it's going to cost X amount of dollars more. So your bill, if it passes, has to be funded in the budget for another $8 million. So getting enough people on board to see that $8 million is worth spending and something we should do is the difficult part.
Does the okay, other than helping come up with the budget legally, constitutionally, what power does the governor have in regards to the budget?
There's some wiggle room within the budget of how they spend those funds, and so they can prioritize that. And that's why I say that they could pass a policy in-house and say, TDEC, we want you to spend this money this way. They have that ability to do that and put restrictions on it that maybe we didn't put in the legislature. So that's not a difficult thing for them to do policy-wise. But moving things from one budget to another, there's certain barriers there. But from the standpoint of what's within their budget, let's say in state parks, in your example, that's certainly in their purview to decide how they're going to spend that money and who they spend it with.
Is that power, I think that power that you just described, is that a power that the legislature actually gave to the governor? Because I don't think it's actually a constitutional power of his, but I could be wrong.
I would think, just on the surface, without doing a lot of thought about it, I would think it's a constitutional power. As the administrative branch, you administer the programs that you're budgeted to administer. So there's a certain amount there. There could certainly be something legislatively on the books that controls that as well.
Okay. All right, you're the chair of the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee. This year there was a lot of concern about House Bill 1890 that was designed to preserve farmland in Tennessee. Because of certain agendas being promoted by the Biden administration, there was a lot of concern and pushback on the bill because of certain things in the bill that sounded a lot like something the administration was pushing. Mm-hmm. You took the concern seriously, and the bill was amended to address those issues. Now, ultimately, the bill, I don't know if it died in the House, the Senate. It didn't get through. The bill didn't get through. If what I saw on the website was updated, and like I said, we have concerns that our administration, that the Lee administration, they'll say that they oppose certain things in the Biden administration, and this was something that's going back a few months. But I remember when this bill was going through, and we'd been talking about the natural asset companies, and they'd been talking about where they were going to, with the natural asset companies, basically some way, somehow allow their value to be traded on the stock exchange. And I don't understand all of that right off the top, but a lot of that, what was in there originally, sounded like that might be what was afoot. But like I say, you did take care of that, and I do appreciate that. But there's still things on our state website. The whole Green New Deal that Biden's pushed, a lot of the things that have been done with the Inflation Reduction Act that push so-called, they label them as environmental issues. And our state has pushed back on some of them, at least publicly. But at the same time, our state website, there's a carbon reduction plan, a climate action plan that's being pushed. It's the same one being pushed by the Biden administration. Why is our state playing along with this?
Well, the examples that we have located involve Department of Environment and Conservation, TDEC, right, Department of Health, and the Department of Transportation. Those are three that we have actually found and identified, and I think you probably have the same ones.
Right.
And all of those entities receive federal dollars for certain programs that they administer. And so that's one of the requirements of those programs, is that they post those phrases, those sentences, and those paragraphs that are at least making a statement about the climate action stuff. So I can assure you, I'm confident those departments would not be doing that if those federal dollars were not tied to that, which goes again to things that I say quite often. We've got to get more of our power back to the states and away from the federal government, first and foremost. We send too much of our money to D.C. unconstitutionally, and they have way too much power over things unconstitutionally that they shouldn't. Most everything should be on a state level where you and I can see each other at Kroger, we see each other at church, but not traveling to D.C. to see your representative. And our founders were very wise in doing that and setting that system up like that. But over the decades, we have ceded a lot of state control, a lot of state power politically and governmentally to the federal government that should not be there. And so more of our money goes, and then we have to get that money back for these programs that, again, shouldn't have even been started in the first place. And then you get these strings tied to it.
Okay, but I mean, well, let's take the EPA. And look, don't get me wrong. I'm not against. I mean, I care about the environment, but the EPA has been a problem long term. I mean, they've done some good things in the past, but they're out of control, as are most three-letter federal agencies. So I would say that the EPA is not even a constitutional, legitimate agency of the federal government. So as far as getting the federal government out of our business, it seems to me like on things like this, we could just say, okay, we're not going to take those dollars that you want to give us to promote something that we don't believe in and that you don't have the constitutional authority to have anything to do with anyhow. So, I mean, I just don't understand why we take their money on those things and then we promote it. And that's what we're doing. I mean, and it's being promoted in our schools too. So our kids are hearing all this stuff. Mm-hmm. The whole Blue Opal City, the whole deal with Ford building electric vehicles is all based on the concept of man-made climate change, and we got to get away from fossil fuels. And so we have to have these electric vehicles, which we're now finding out, hey, that's not going to work. But it just seems to me like anytime we parrot what they're pushing, we really, even if we publicly file suit, like we have in some cases, like a while back with the stuff with the illegal aliens, we filed all these lawsuits, but we were given professional licenses. That was a state deal that we were doing that. So it just doesn't make sense to me that on one hand, we'll publicly have our AG file something, but then on our state websites, we have all of these things that are promoting what the Biden administration is doing, what the left is doing.
Well, and everything has consequences. So as we have ceded that state power to the federal government and we cede our money to the federal government, then they end up controlling these three-letter agencies, most of which are unconstitutional, end up controlling so much of what comes back to the states. Give you one example, TDAG. So if we said tomorrow, we are not going to take those federal dollars so that we can take that climate action plan wording off of our website, here's what would happen. And I know this for a fact because I used to work for TDAG, 3 decades ago. We would immediately lose our delegated authority to run EPA's programs in this state. We would then immediately have EPA running those programs in our state, not state employees that I can deal with and you can deal with, but EPA and federal employees running those programs in our state. And I can assure you, we don't want that. So right now, we take those federal dollars under several different programs from EPA so that state employees can administer those, and EPA leaves us alone. As long as we're following their guidelines and adhering to their permits and their laws and their rules, then we get to run the show in Tennessee with Tennessee people. And you would not want it the other way around. That's just one example I know of that if we said we're not going to take it, then I know that consequence is coming the next day.
So what do we do? I mean, they're not going to voluntarily give up their power.
Well, we got into this situation over many decades, and it's going to take a while to get out of it. And it's going to take folks like me, folks like you, pushing back every single day, working with our colleagues in other states to say, okay, we need an effort, a national effort with a lot of states involved to get these three-letter agencies abolished. And we're going to have friends in the White House. We're going to have friends in Congress that have the majorities where they can get this stuff passed. And then we put forth the effort to get it changed. And it's probably not going to happen overnight, but we certainly need to start with some of the most egregious offenders that are violating the Constitution and our civil rights day in and day out with some of their policies and their rules. So I think that's one of the first things we do. It's going to be that's something that I talk about with my colleagues in other states when I'm at conferences and meetings with them, is to keep that thought alive, the federalism. So we're bringing that power back to the states.
Yeah. And that's, in the opening of the show, I always talk about the nullification legislation. And if I remember correctly, you were a co-sponsor of that in the session, in the earlier part, in 23, when Representative Holsey first presented his bill. And I hope that's something that you'll support in the future, is a nullification process, because we have a lot of things that our state really needs to push back on.
Certainly going to be looking at that, what the details are, and there's some other facts that have emerged about that process that I want to weigh out and make sure that that's the right avenue for us. Certainly in principle, I'm in total agreement that we have to push back against the federal overreach. If it's not constitutional, then we need to be fighting against it day in and day out through the legal means that we have, and I believe court cases are very effective. I've said for quite some time the Biden administration and before that the Obama administration, they don't listen to reason. They don't listen to the states. They listen to courts. So we're going to have to take them to court. And we've got an attorney general now that's very willing to stand up for not only state laws and the state constitution, but for the freedoms and liberties of average Tennesseans before those federal courts, to make sure we tie the federal agencies up in court and get their rules and regulations and policies overturned.
Well, it's definitely a long haul. You may have more faith in the federal judiciary than I do. Odds are you probably have more faith in it than I do. But anyway, another thing before I get to your closing thoughts. There was a bill this year in reference to the National Guard. And I think we talked offline about this. When they get called up for, by the state, I guess, for instance, like when they send them to Texas or wherever, there were issues with their pay, and you were able to get some of that addressed. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Christmas before last, my local guard unit invited me out to have lunch, their annual Christmas lunch with the guardsmen, and so we had some fellowship together over a potluck lunch, and it was really, really a good time just getting to know them better. And as they were cleaning up and we were wrapping up, I was sitting there with the commander of that unit and just talking about issues that they have, and specifically ask about when they're deployed to Texas, because I wanted to know more about what we're sending them into, what kind of things they do. So one of the things he mentioned that was a challenge, he said, you probably wouldn't think it would be, is getting paid. He said, some of these guys, I mean, it's a real struggle for them to go 4, 5, sometimes 6 weeks before they see a paycheck. So they leave their job temporarily to go on these assignments for, again, to go into Texas or a storm or whatever it might be, where they get deployed by the governor, and they're not getting any kind of pay for weeks. And I said, so what do you do? And he said, well, many of the officers loan them money if we can, but he said that'll only go so far. And so I got to thinking about it after that. They didn't ask me to do anything. It just expressing a concern, and I was asking a lot of questions. And so I started looking into it the next week and got with the Human Resources Department and said, tell me about this. How does this work? And they said, well, they have to go and start a pay period. They have to work for 2 weeks until a certain date in the month. Then the pay goes in, and it's either the following 15th or the 30th. The pay would then be in their account. So that's just the system. And I said, well, what can we do to change that? And they said, well, we'll look into it and get back to you. So a few days later, the gentleman got back to me and he said, well, we actually have a pay system already set up in state law. We just have to tell us to put these guys under that when they're on state deployment. So he said it has to be a law. We thought there might could be a policy change, but he said, no, you're going to have to pass a law. So we drafted that. They vetted it through the department. It was real simple, just a short bill. And we immediately filed that January and started running it through and got it passed without any issues whatsoever. And I have since learned through some of the folks that have been deployed last fall, I followed them and actually talked to the commander that was going to Texas back in November, and he remembered about that law and said, I'm anxious to see how this works. So They literally pulled out of Millington on a Sunday morning. So a week from the next Thursday, less than 2 weeks from them deploying, he sent me a text that Thursday evening and said, tomorrow our pay will be in our accounts electronically, and it will be weekly after this. So he said it's worked like a charm. So they didn't even work a full 2 weeks till they had money in their accounts, and then it was weekly after that. So, something with state government worked and worked very well. And it just keeps from putting those guys that are out there, defending us or working on our behalf, keeps them from putting their families at risk of losing something over a financial situation that we're putting them in.
It's hard to believe that they went all these years and nobody in the chain of command thought to say, hey, what are we going to do here? This just doesn't make sense. I mean, we've had a guard for a long time. It blows my mind that somebody didn't bring this up before now.
Yeah, my dad was a guardsman. My brother, younger brother, was a guardsman. So I know a lot of them, and I guess it's just so many other things are maybe more important or on the very front line of discussions, and this one was not. So I was just glad that I almost tripped up on this one and saw that need and was able to find the right piece there to get that change so that it would help them out.
Especially for the lower ranks, that would have been really rough. Okay, now I'm gonna leave and not gonna be making any pay at home.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna get paid for what I'm doing for 4 or 5 weeks. There's a lot of people who can't do that. I mean, it's
pretty rough.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I'm glad you're able to get that through. Any closing thoughts? Any other legislation you'd like to talk about?
I will say this. I want to be responsive to the citizens. Obviously, when people find an issue just like this National Guard issue, I like for them to share it with me. And I have people very frequently mention an issue that they've come across that needs to be adjusted in state law. Sometimes it can be adjusted within a department administratively, and we look for those opportunities every chance we can. I actually had one come up last year, and I worked with TDEC on it and said, do I need to file a law that will fix this, or can you do that? And they said, no, we think we can do it administratively, and they did. They worked behind the scenes, and they kept me posted on that. And so I'm the last one to propose changing a law. That's something. Matter of fact, the first law that I passed was a repeal of a bad law. When I was first elected in 2018, right after I was elected, I had a local business come to me, literally a doctor and an individual that worked for her, the only 2 employees of this business. They had just signed a 5-year lease on this building, and they discovered after that a new law had been passed earlier that year that was going into effect the following, I don't know, several months later, maybe 5 or 6 months later, that was going to put them out of business. I'm like, well, okay, well, explain this. So I went to their business and they showed me what they were doing. This dealt with ultrasounds, just like a 3D or 4D imaging center that does a baby gender reveal or something like that, just, non-medical whatsoever. And there had been a protectionist bill passed that previous year to protect one business that was moving into Middle Tennessee. They're a national company, and everywhere they build, when they come into a state, they try to get this law passed that requires some gold standard training for an ultrasound technician. Again, non-medical, but they got it passed. Hardly anybody asked any questions about it. It was a very influential member at that time who's not in the legislature anymore. And when they shared that with me and I watched some of the video of presenting the bill and nobody asked questions, it just sailed through. I said, well, I'll be glad to file something. So I ran that bill in 2019 when we first convened the General Assembly, 111th, and ran that through, didn't have any opposition whatsoever, and got that bill repealed, fortunately. And I think there were maybe 12 or 14 businesses, little small businesses across the state that were literally going to have to close that year if that bill had not been passed. So I'm very proud that my first bill was to repeal a bad law on the books, and I'm always looking for solutions that don't involve passing a law to get something done. And with state government, that's very feasible. We can work with departments, and we try to work very closely with them to implement these changes for the people where they can. And certainly they'd let us know if there's a law needed, like that National Guard bill. and we're glad to run that to take care of our folks.
You know, I think July 1st, there's going to be 200 some new laws take effect.
And I think that's right.
And I don't know what the average is for every year, but, and the House is limited somewhat. You guys can only file 15 each year. Of course, the Senate's unlimited. So since
Yes.
you have to have both the House and Senate, you still end up with an insane number of bills are ran every year.
Yeah. Something like 1,500 or so.
I mean, that's way too many bills. That's too many laws.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way, if you're running 1,500 bills, that you're going to really know the ins and outs of that bill. I mean, so in your case, let's say you can file 15 and then you get another 15 from a senator. 30 bills is a whole lot to know all the ins and outs of. It just seems to me like there should be some sort of reduction altogether of what you guys are even allowed to try to put through every year.
Well, the 15 is a reduction. It used to be unlimited.
Yep.
And so you would have a situation where when the Democrats were in control, as you remember, you'd have Democrat members that would file 100 bills. And they would sometimes do that as a favor to lobbyists. So that lobbyist could go back to their customer and say, hey, I see this bill filed over here. I'm going to need some more money this year to fight that. That went on, I'm told. I didn't see any of that. I've never seen any of that, but that's what I'm told happened at that time. So it's been reduced by putting a 15 limit on it. And those 15 that we have, that's all we have. We don't get to have 15 from a senator or anything like that. It's if those 15, there's going to be obviously some senators that come to us and say, hey, I've got a bill. Can one of your 15 take care of mine? You know, file this one for me, and I'll file one or two for you. So there's sometimes you get to do a little trade-off just to get them filed initially. Of course, you can sign over another sponsor if you don't feel comfortable running that bill or you think somebody else has an expertise that's better, then you can sign that bill over to someone later. At many of ours, if I file 15, as a chairman, I actually can file 5 additional bills that have something to do with my committee. So I can file 20 bills. I may not run but 5 or 6 of those in a year, just because the timing isn't right or something changes with information I got. Like I had one this year that was on parental rights. And once I filed it and started getting more details and getting some groups like Eagle Forum involved in it and learning what this was going to do, and Family Action Council of Tennessee was one that was giving us a lot of input. They said, this may be a slippery slope. Let's slow down and look at this. So I ended up not running that bill. There was another bill that was very, very similar that was put forth, and we passed that, that got tweaked along the way so that we didn't end up in a worse situation for parents than we have now. So some things happen. You get new information, and you have to respond to that new information and don't take it lightly. So a number of my bills did not even make it to committee. I decided to hold those. I had one on property tax where we were putting a limit on how much counties and cities could raise your property taxes. And I held that till late in session. There was a group, a very conservative group that was helping me with that, and we were working on crafting it. And there was one piece of it that I just wasn't comfortable with. I actually felt like it might cause more property tax increases over the long haul. And so we were holding that and working on those details when another group out of the blue started sending out some kind of text messages or social media post about members opposing that idea of putting caps on property. We hadn't even had a bill before a committee yet. No one could oppose it unless they just went out and made some speech or something, which they had not done. So they targeted certain members, and I couldn't figure out their reasoning behind it, but it immediately threw a wet blanket on that idea for a year. I mean, it just, okay, there's no way we're going to get this passed because these are some key people on committees that we need, and they're already offended by someone, not us, but some other group lying about them, saying they're not going to be for this when they actually probably were for it. So, we're just people. Sometimes we get offended, our feelings get hurt, and we may react accordingly. And so we're no different. We put our pants on just like you do, Dave, just like all these listeners do. We're just average folks, just put in a position that is an honor to be in, but it carries a lot of responsibility. And we do make mistakes. Some of us can wear our feelings on our sleeves a little too much. and be offended easily, and then change our direction from that offense when we shouldn't. We should just let it roll off and move on. But that can happen. We're only human.
Yeah, I've heard about that. So and so will never support so and so's bill, even if they agree with it, just because of something that happened in the past. Now, I just want to clarify. So, okay, you're limited to 15. So, if a senator, and of course, you look at these senators. If you look on the website, they've got all of these different. Granted, there's 33 senators and there's 95 or 99 legislators, so they have more to choose from. But so you guys, other than being a committee chair, there's no way that you end up actually getting any extra bills through because the Senate is somewhat unlimited in terms. They still have to work within your restriction of 15, or in your case 20 as a committee chair.
On average, you could say that. For example, since there's 1/3 of the senators as there are representatives, they would have 3 times the bills on average. So they should average about 45 bills per session if every single House member files 15, which we don't. There are members that don't file 15 every year. So theoretically, they would have an average of 45. Some just refuse to take more than 20 or 30. And then that puts somebody else having to sponsor at least. They may not run it, but they're at least going to have to sponsor and get it filed in the Senate side, 60 or 70 bills. So you do get some senators that are willing to look out for us and take care of getting those bills filed, just so that, again, later they could sign them over to another senator that you might talk to that has a passion for that particular subject and topic, and get them to run it through.
Okay. And one thing people need to understand is, the lobbyists are up there all the time. The left is up there every day. On a day-to-day basis, we are outnumbered as far as the people up there. But I think way too many on our side don't bother calling, don't bother emailing. They don't pay any attention after the election's over. And, we elect you guys for the session. That's what we elect you for. What you do in session is what counts. You
Yes.
say anything you want during the election, but so many people just disengage after that. But, and I've seen, and I know, perfect example, when back House Bill 1890, you and a lot of others got information on that, and you made adjustments from that. And there's other bills that the same thing happens. And sometimes they get shut down altogether, or at least delayed for a year, or until the next session, or until after election, whatever the case might be. But, people can have an impact if they call during the session, if they email, and if you can make it up there, that's even better. But
well, first and foremost, their vote matters. They've got to show up and vote. I was knocking on doors last week, and I had a list of 3 out of 4 voters and 4 out of 4 voters in the primary. And I would start down a long street, and there would be one house on that street that either qualified as a 3 of 4 or 4 of 4 on a whole street. I'm just like, why don't people vote? It matters. You need to show up and vote. Many of these elections are literally, determined by a handful of votes. So we need folks to express their thoughts and their opinions, get educated on the ballot, know who's on the ballot, look them up, talk to them. That's what we're here for. Then secondly, to your point, be involved in session. Watch, be a part of a group. I started, I guess, this kind of career, if you want to call it that, with the National Federation of Independent Business. NFIB is a national organization. They have a state organization that stands up for small businesses. So as a small business owner, they're kind of my lobbying arm, because I can't hire lobbyists. I don't have the money to hire lobbyists. So through NFIB, I have them looking out for me, and they're member driven. They determine what issues they're going to support or oppose based on their membership. They poll the members, and they give us a poll that's like pros and cons. You make your choice. And then they only advocate for things that we as members support. So, and they also have a PAC. We donate to that PAC, and then that PAC ends up voting on what candidates for election they're going to support financially. So it's all member driven. And a lot of these lobbying firms and lobbyists are member driven. They're representing thousands across Tennessee of a certain group. It might be veterinarians, it might be any other profession. So get involved in one of those groups. That's one of your biggest, I think, advantages to be powerful and have your voice heard. Get involved in one of those groups that you can associate with, and make sure your voice is heard in there. Get involved with it day to day, and then follow legislation that you can search. I set up something a couple of years ago, or I got it set up. Our speaker was very kind and gracious to make sure that this got done when he found out that we didn't have this in place. But citizens aren't able to, up until that point, able to go on and see the latest amendments on a bill.
Yep.
It was only after they were through a committee and voted on that you could see them. And so we made some changes. The speaker made some changes in the clerk's office and how things were processed. And we basically created a dashboard for citizens that's very similar to what we have in our offices in Nashville, so that citizens can go in there and they can do a search of a particular topic. They can then save that search, save those bills, and have it give updates. I believe it does some kind of updates, or you certainly go back in very regularly and check the latest status of those particular bills that you're interested in. So it's a very neat service. And it's all about transparency. I want folks involved. I want them to know exactly what we're doing on a day-to-day basis while we're in Nashville, and to then fulfill their constitutional obligation, responsibility to inform the legislators. We need their information. Just like the bill you mentioned, the Conservation Easement Program, we had individuals calling and emailing us saying, beware of this. Make sure this is written this way. And so we did. We tweaked it and made sure that it was not only written properly, but we asked the right questions and got on the record what the legislative intent was, so that nothing could go awry in the future if that got passed. And it didn't make it, but it may be back. I'm not sure. The whole effort was to preserve our ag land for agriculture, at least when that owner wants to do that. So I think it's a good bill and a good idea, but a few folks got crossways of it, thinking that it was taking away property rights from people in the future, but it really wasn't, because you can own a trust. Dave Vance could set up a trust right now and obligate his family for many, many decades of how his assets are going to be spent or dealt with. So it's no different than that. And so once we kind of shook that out. I was pretty comfortable with that, knowing that comparison, because I've been somewhat familiar with trust that folks have informed me about over the years, and know how they work in general.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for what you do, and thanks for coming on. It's been good talking to you, and good luck to you in your race.
Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate being able to come on and share with your listeners, and certainly appreciate anybody's support that can help us out in this re-election campaign.
Yeah. We've got your website up there if you want to say a little something about it.
Thank you very much. Yes. My email address is chris@christoddfortn.com. Of course, the website, christoddfortn.com. You can go on and donate. We've been very thrilled this year to have folks from all over the state get on there and hit the donate button and send us $50 or $100 or even more. Very appreciative of that. It's very expensive to run a campaign. It's kind of a shame. My folks that I'm seeing at the doorsteps are telling me how frustrated they are that we're having to spend money on a Republican primary here when they've got somebody already in office that they trust, that's doing the job they ask them to do. And so I appreciate those comments, but we're going to continue fighting and making sure that a special interest doesn't control this seat, that it is held by the people and for the people. Well, that's what I'm about. Totally transparent about that, and want to make sure that that continues. And I've got a lot of supporters that tell me that every day. They want to make sure that I stay here, continue doing the job for them that I have promised them to do.
Well, hey, once again, it's good to have you on, and I have no questions when it comes to you and the Second Amendment, so I appreciate that, and I do appreciate you being responsive throughout the session. I've sent you questions and sent you information in the past on other things, and you've always responded, so I do appreciate that.
Love the input.
Well, I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss a show. The TI is also available to listen to as an audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, and the other popular podcast platforms. You can find them on our website, tninformer.com. While you're there, please take a minute to sign up for a weekly newsletter to stay up to date. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Just type in, search for @tninformer. Please share us with your friends. Join us tomorrow night, June 25th, when our guest will be Representative Jody Barrett from District 69, who is also up for re-election. Hope you'll join us then. That's it for now, and good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.